I'm Fran Shure, and I have a master's degree from the University of Colorado. I've had a private practice as a psychotherapist and as a licensed professional counselor for about 20 years. Why do people resist this information? The information that shows that the official story about 9/11 cannot be true. What I've learned is that as humans, each of us have a worldview, and that worldview is usually formed in great part by the culture we grow up in. Our worldview is, I've thought of it very much like our home. With our physical home, it's a place where we feel safe and secure. Now, a worldview is very much like our mental home. It's where we feel safe and secure. Most of us will fight to protect our physical home, and just as we'll fight to protect our physical home, we'll also fight very often to protect our worldview, our mental home, what our sense of reality is. In fact, people will often fight vehemently to protect their home or their worldview. Now, I've noticed as I've spoken with people about 9/11 that I get some very interesting, spontaneous reactions from people. These reactions are very revealing, and I'm going to read you a few. I've kept a list of them. However, I believe that every one of us will be able to relate to these reactions because most of us bought the official story about what happened on 9/11 completely, and then we were shocked when we discovered evidence to the contrary. So here are a few of those spontaneous initial reactions to hearing the contradictory evidence about 9/11. Fran, I refuse to believe that many Americans could be that satanically treasonous. Someone would have talked. Now this reaction is very interesting because it contains two assumptions. Number one, that if 9/11 is a false flag operation orchestrated by elements within our government, that it would have required a large number of people to have pulled it off. The second assumption is that somebody would have had a conscience and would have talked. But these are beliefs. They are not scientific facts. But these beliefs do keep us from looking at the empirical evidence. Now, there's another interesting thing about that particular reaction, and that's the words, I refuse to believe. Whenever anyone says, I refuse to believe, you can be sure that they are not ready to receive the information that you have to give them. The information's too uncomfortable. So whenever we say, I refuse to believe, we can be sure that the evidence that's coming our way is not bearable and that it's conflicting with our worldview much too much. So another statement that a person said to me, and by the way, this one's very common, and it's common because we're not psychopaths. We have a conscience, and we can't imagine that other people could do something such as put explosives in the towers. This person said, think about what you're saying. What monster would have done such a thing? Do you actually think that people could be such monsters? And do you think they would be crazy enough to think they could get by with this? So all we have to do when we think about that reaction is think about Nazi Germany and the atrocities that were committed there. Another reaction, Fran, you can't expect someone to let in information that turns their world upside down. If this were true, up would be down, and down would be up. My life would never be the same. Another said, have you lost friends talking about this issue? And by the way, that's a very important statement. I think that is at bottom what most of us fear, is being ostracized. And by the way, the answer to this is, no, I have not lost any real friends, but I have had very good friendships severely strained. And that's the nature of this subject. when we introduce an idea that is paradigm shifting to a person, this is to be expected. These next two responses were reported to me by some other people. I wouldn't want to live in a world where such a thing could be true. And another person said, I wouldn't believe this even true. So here are some very honest responses that I've heard. I must admit that I seriously resist anyone messing with my worldview. And here's another one. Fran, I've made my life very small. I do not see any loss of liberties in my life. Gas prices are up, but all my friends and I continue to drive whatever we want to drive. As long as my kids are fine and I can live the lifestyle that we have, the truth is, I don't really care what happened on 9/11. And finally, here's the most honest response I have ever received. If what you're saying is true, I don't want to know, because I would become very negative. My life would go downhill. I'd take a turn for the worse. So as I thought about all of these responses, I realized that what is common to every one of them is the emotion of fear. People are afraid of being ostracized, they're afraid of being alienated, they're afraid of being shunned, they're afraid of their lives being inconvenienced, they'd have to change their lives, they're afraid of being confused, they're afraid of psychological deterioration, they're afraid of feeling helpless and vulnerable. And they're afraid that they won't be able to handle the feelings that are coming up. So really fear is at the bottom of each of these feelings. And when we feel vulnerable and helpless, it's a very terrible feeling. None of us want to feel helpless and vulnerable. So we want to defend ourselves. And the way we often do that is with anger. So then we become angry. And when we become angry, then we become indignant. We become offended. We want to ridicule the messenger. We want to pathologize the messenger. And we want to censor the messenger. So another lens through which we can understand the resistance to the information that contradicts the official story of 9/11 is the term cognitive dissonance. Social psychologists have given us this term, and basically what it is we have two cognitions that are dissonant. In the case of 9/11, we have the cognition that the official story, what our government has told us, and that 9/11 was perpetrated by 19 Muslims, and because they hate our freedoms. I'm going to start over because I'm doing too many us here. So I'm going to start over on that. So when we hear information that contradicts our worldview, social psychologists call the resulting insecurity cognitive dissonance. For example, with 9/11, we have one cognition, which is what the official story of 9/11, what our government told us, what our media repeated to us over and over, that 19 Muslims attacked us. On the other hand, we have what scientists, researchers, architects, engineers are now beginning to tell us, which is that there is evidence that shows that the official story cannot be true, that 9/11 was most likely a false flag operation. So now we've lost our sense of security. We are starting to feel vulnerable. Now we're confused. Now we have a choice, and we all have this choice. And what some of us will tend to do is deny the evidence that's coming our way and stick to the original story, the official story, and to try to regain our equilibrium in that way. Another thing we can do is decide to look at the conflicting evidence and be sincere and be open-minded and look at both sides of the issue and then make up our own mind about what reality is. Another lens through which we can understand our situation in our country is the model of the dysfunctional family. So for example, in a dysfunctional family, the parents abuse their children. The children, on the other hand, are dependent upon their parents. They need their parents for survival. They need to be loved by their parents. They need to feel that their parents are good. So in spite of what they hear with their own ears, see with their own eyes, they will cling to their belief that their parents are good people. Then when we grow up as children, when children grow up, we have the opportunity then often to look at our family situation more objectively and to acknowledge the abuse and to choose to heal ourselves, choose to raise our children in a different way. And if it's appropriate, we may hold our parents accountable, hold them legally accountable. So on the national level, when it comes to 9/11, when it comes to the wars that resulted from 9/11, when it comes to torture, we need to hold the perpetrators legally accountable. First of all, we need a real investigation to find out what happened, and then once we do, is hold those people legally accountable. And this is not from a place of vengeance. This is not for vengeance. This is simply to change. It's the only way to change our dysfunctional culture to a functional and sane culture. And in fact, it's really the only way that we can change the suicidal course that we're now on. So just as with the individual family, when we come to the national level, when something like 9/11 happens, we need to be sure that we have a real investigation into who the perpetrators are, and then we need to be sure that those perpetrators are held legally accountable. It's part of the healing process on the individual level as on the collective level. So with both the level of the individual family and the national level, if the perpetrators are not held accountable, then we can be sure that they will continue with their abuse. And we can continue on the national level, if we don't hold these people accountable, to know that we'll have more false flag operations, we'll have greater deceptions, we'll have greater violence. But it seems like what's so obvious that if we don't hold people accountable, that we're really setting the stage for more false flag operations, for more loss of liberties. And it seems like that should be said, don't you think? So just as with the individual family, it's the same on the national level. We need the truth in order to heal. If we don't want greater deceptions, if we don't want more war based on these deceptions, then we need to know the truth. And the way to find the truth is an investigation and then holding those responsible legally accountable. What I found to be very helpful in understanding our current situation are names. Names can help us get our mind around certain concepts. For example, the term false flag operation. A false flag operation is usually a violent act perpetrated by one's own government or group and scapegoating another group of people for the purpose of convincing the population to go to war abroad and to restrict liberties at home. When we do some research into false flag operations, we find that they are probably government's most dependable way of getting support for war. Now, what I find when I talk to people about 9/11, if they're very resistant to it, sometimes I'll just tell them not to even look at 9/11, but just go look up on the internet false flag operation. And what we will all find there is that history is full of these false flag operations. So we're also very fortunate to have the term deep state. This term was coined by Professor Peter Dale Scott. And what this tells us is that those people we elect to be our representatives are what's called the public state. Those are the people we think who are making the decisions in our government. However, what he's showing us through the research he's done is that some very large institutions, for example, our intelligence institutions, some very influential and wealthy people, are actually part of the deep state, and they are the ones who are in reality determining policy. So a wonderful book for learning more about the deep state is Professor Peter Dale Scott's book, The Road to 9/11. And we have more recently been given another phrase, state crimes against democracy, or SCADS, S-C-A-D-S. The social scientist, through the very prominent and well-regarded journal, the American Behavioral Scientist, devoted their entire February 2010 issue to this study of state crimes against democracy. What these social scientists are telling us is that they are seeing patterns. They are seeing patterns for many state crimes against democracy. They have looked at the John F. Kennedy assassination, the Martin Luther King assassination, the Bobby Kennedy assassination, the Iran-Contra conspiracy, the Watergate conspiracy. And what they're seeing is that there are patterns, and they're telling us that as social scientists, they need to study these patterns, how these events took place, who benefited from them, what were the resulting policy changes. They are saying that as social scientists, they need to study these criminal patterns by the deep state, just as they would study any other social issue. So why is it important for us as a nation, as individuals and a nation, to know the truth about what happened on 9/11? Why is that so important? Well, I think we can look at it from a point of healing. If we're in individual therapy and we're finding healing for ourselves, we have to first know the truth in order to heal ourselves. That's the first thing. If we are part of a collective, part of a nation, then we will also have a dysfunctional nation if we don't know the truth. We can't have a functional nation if we're operating on lies. So how do we find the truth? How do we know what's the myth and what's the reality? We do that by turning to professionals, and that's what I love about Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, because they bring the professionals to the table that can speak authoritatively. These are the architects, the engineers, the structural engineers, and they speak authoritatively on the characteristics of the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center buildings.